how do you give great feedback in a way that is honest, constructive, and motivational? What is it that you can say to people that will give them the inspiration to try harder, try something new, or maybe do something in a different order? Whatever it is that you can do to help them, great feedback is always appreciated. Hi, you're listening to the Clever Together Communication podcast, which is designed for business and technology experts who want to communicate more intentionally and internationally for a more inspiring and rewarding career. I'm your host, Corinne Wilhelm, and I'm on a mission to encourage non-native speaking professionals to go for the reputation and career that they deserve through communication. So, let's get clever together, shall we? One thing that you need to be very clear about is whether somebody is asking you for feedback or advice. Feedback is more about observation, what you see, what you experience, whereas advice is opinion. So be very sure about that, and before you go giving anybody feedback, make sure that you have their permission. It might be that now is not a good time. It might be that they are just beginning to process what's just happened. Maybe they need that time. So be respectful of that. But most people are quite happy to have feedback. And in many organisations, people are leaving because they're not getting enough feedback. So by giving somebody feedback, you are giving them an opportunity to grow. Now, the tempting thing to do when you give somebody feedback is to focus too much on the negatives, because that's what jumps out at you. But it's very, very important to look at the positives too. No doubt you've heard the advice that you should have a positive, then a negative or constructive, and then finishing with a positive. Now, this might feel to you a bit like kindergarten, but psychologically, this is a worthwhile thing to do. It makes sense. So it's really good to start with what went really well, what you enjoyed about what you just experienced. By pointing out the positives, you will also make that person more open to the constructive stuff, which you will come to in a moment. So don't just tell them what you thought was good, but tell them why you thought that was good. You did this, and I thought that was really good because, and then tell them. This gives them a more complete, holistic understanding and a bigger picture. And this will help them remember the information as well. Don't just think about, for example, just the delivery. Think about the vocabulary, the body language, the whole thing. Try and see things through the angles of different people. And remember, if you're looking at somebody's presentation for a client, you want to think about things from the perspective of the client, because you're not likely to get direct feedback from the client themselves. But for now, you need to rely on people to give you a client's perspective, or a shareholder's perspective, or a stakeholder's perspective, or an employee's an employee's, that's difficult, isn't it? Employee's perspective. You see, if you slow down, you can say anything. So be sure to give them the chance as well to process what you're saying. All too often we give feedback and it will be a whole list of things, bomb, 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 and nobody can process that. You need to give them the chance to really think about what you're saying without being over dramatic, but just use pauses and maybe a little bit of silence just for them to reflect. And remember, rather than telling them, you could be really smart about this and ask them. Before you say anything, it's a good idea to ask them how they felt that it went. And normally you will get an idea of what's important to them. So if they say, oh, I missed out the bit about that, or I spoke too fast, or I was nervous, or whatever, then you can zone in on that first and then come to your parts later. But maybe the parts that they were worried about went actually pretty well. Be honest and open with them, and constructive advice does feel uncomfortable sometimes, but it's something that with practice does get easier. And you will see that as people take on your advice and they turn that around and they come back to you and they tell you how well it went, then you will be much more motivated to give people feedback and advice the next time round. So it's an important skill to learn, and it's a skill that does need to be practiced, and it's something you can practice with all kinds of people in all walks of life, and you will discover that if you give freely your feedback and your observations and your advice, then people will want to come to you when they need to improve something next time round. And what does that make you? It makes you the leader. Becoming a leader isn't about job titles, is it? It's about the way that you make people feel. It's about people wanting to reach out to you with their ideas, people wanting to reach out to you for confirmation, assurance, justification. Are you on track? They'll want to ask you first, and that makes you leadership material. So feedback is incredibly important, and if you want to practice giving feedback, I can give you a very good piece of advice. Join Toastmasters. At Toastmasters, we not only give speeches, but we also give feedback on those speeches. So you will get an opportunity to practice this skill away from your boss, away from your team, away from your clients, in a completely different setting, and you can practice giving feedback. Now, if you're looking for a more corporate option, then you might be a good candidate for my club. Together with business experts from all over the world, you will prepare for specific business situations. There's only 50 of us ever going to be in there, and at the moment the doors are not open, but you can sign up via my website. Go to EnglishSpeakingExperts.com/club. By learning to give feedback, you will become more approachable, and it's that approachability that makes you popular, like we talked about last week. In fact, I wanted to ask you about that. How did it go last week? Did you try that out? Did you make a list of the people that you enjoy working with and the ones that you maybe don't really enjoy working with? Did you look at their behaviours, their comments, their body language? What did you notice? Have you had a chance to try any of those things out yourself? The next skill you need to develop is not thinking too much about the past, because what's done is done. You need to be thinking forward, the next presentation that they hold, or the next time that they present their KPIs. Think about what they can change going forward. And it might not be just their delivery or the content. It might be something more rudimentary, like their mindset, or what they're doing with their fingers or their feet. So be very specific about your feedback and let them see it through your eyes, and give them an opportunity to tell you how they felt in that moment. And they might well pick it up themselves, because of course if they identify a weakness themselves as a result of speaking to you with these kind of questions, just like you would with a coach, then that lesson will stick much longer, and you'll have a better chance of getting them to implement more professionally next time. So for example, instead of saying, oh, you don't need to be so scared, you can say something like, I noticed that you seemed uncomfortable, or when you were holding the paper you were shaking slightly, and then just leave it and give them an opportunity to say something. Or instead of saying you need to look at the audience, you need to improve your eye contact, then you can say something like, I saw that you were averting your eyes from the audience. Were you checking your notes, or did you feel uncomfortable? Did you feel out of your depth? Tell me a little bit about how you felt in that situation. Do you see that makes it more of a conversation? And it's a conversation that you're going to pull people in with. And remember, when you're speaking to somebody, it's very tempting to give them feedback about everything. But can you imagine how intimidating that will be if you're trying to correct everything at once? So instead, why don't you ask them beforehand? So if somebody says, I want to give this presentation, I'd really appreciate your feedback afterwards, to say your mentor or your boss or somebody, or maybe even a colleague, then that's fine, but try and articulate what exactly you want them to look at, because that will make it easier for them and it will make it easier for you. Because if you try and correct everything all at once, you actually won't know what worked and what didn't. So by focusing on one thing at a time, you'll have a better chance of making a better performance over time the more that you practice. And make sure that the feedback that you give is at the right level for the person of that experience. So if I'm talking to you about something, I don't want to give you feedback as if I was talking to the CEO when you've just joined the company. It has to be relevant to your level of experience within the organisation and your experience in terms of qualifications and industry experience and so on as well. So the research shows us that positive feedback tends to lead to more confidence building and a bigger chance of you achieving your goals. So seek a balance that is, a good mix between positive and negative. And if you do struggle to identify something positive to say, sometimes it really is that terrible, then look at the areas that the person really wanted to focus on. So, for example, if she says, I find it really difficult to actually look at my audience, then focus on that and tell them if they're doing a good job, or give them some tips or hints if they are open to those, to help them to conquer that little part of the process. Small steps, honey, small steps. Now, when it comes to constructive criticism, it's all about giving somebody advice that is respectful. Okay, so you can say that somebody's flipping awful, but you can use words that are still respectful. And that way, you'll have a better chance of picking them up exactly where they are and taking them to the next part of their personal development journey. So when you're being constructive, that doesn't always mean being rude. In fact, to the contrary, you can give constructive feedback in a very, very charming way. And you can also have a bit of humour, I go swimming with a guy, he's my trainer, and every now and again he'll say, do you remember when you started, you were doing this, and splash, 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 and he makes a bit of a joke about it. And it's okay, because I've moved on so much since I was doing that I can laugh at it too. But if he'd have pointed that out just a week before, that wouldn't have had the same impact, would it? So choose your timing, use a bit of humour if you like, and feel free to make this an enjoyable experience. Constructive feedback doesn't have to be super serious, does it? Because we're all on a learning journey together, right? Now, if like me, you're a bit of a note taker and you've been asked to give some feedback, please resist the temptation to focus too much attention on writing notes. For example, if you're giving somebody feedback on a presentation and you're frantically writing notes, then you might miss some of the really powerful body language. So try and really focus and be present for that presentation, for instance, and try not to write too many notes. I know it's difficult. I've been caught with this many times myself, but this is something that you want to pay attention to. The next thing I want you to think about is concentrating on the action, not the person. To keep your focus on behaviours, not the person, it's very useful to use I sentences. So I noticed that you were using your hands a lot, which was great, but you were using the same action all the time and it became a little bit distracting. You see? So it was my observation. That doesn't mean it's anybody else's observation. And you, as the person receiving feedback from me, It's up to you whether you accept that or not. Say, for example, you're at work and somebody has just stood up and given an overview of their KPIs. Okay, so you could say, you were boring. Probably not going to get you too many popularity points. But what about saying, I observed how you didn't really seem very passionate or energetic when you were speaking to the audience. And then leave a gap. And finally, when you have finished speaking to somebody and giving them feedback, then, ask them if they need any clarification or explanation, or if anything wasn't really all that clear. If you feel comfortable giving advice, do so. And that may well depend on the situation you're in, how high they are in the hierarchy and so on. But, relate to your own personal experience if you need to, and give them an open door to come back and speak to you anytime again. It might well be that they will put through some of the changes that you suggested, and they wouldn't mind doing another dummy run with you. So you as a leader would make yourself available for that. And actually that's exactly the kind of thing that we're doing in the club as well. So that was a short episode about feedback. I hope that you found this useful. Giving feedback is a very rewarding part of working with other people. So be brave, get out there, ask for feedback, and the chances are that you also will be asked to give feedback. So it's always a win-win situation, I find, very rewarding, and you always learn something when you give feedback on somebody else anyway. Oh, and before I go, there is one thing I'd like to share with you. On Friday, the 29th of April, I will be holding a free event for just 17 people in a Zoom room, and the whole point of the session is to play with words. Now, any of you that have been listening for a bit longer will know that I do quite like to write haiku in the evenings, and haiku are nothing more than a 3-line piece of poetry, and it comes from Japan, but I just use it as a way to kind of show my gratitude, or just to kind of zone out for the day. When I'm going to bed, I write myself a little haiku. It doesn't take me long. On the 29th, it's Poem in Your Pocket Day. So I thought I would use that opportunity to show you how I use things like poetry to explore speaking in English in a way that is fun and creative and, well, quite silly actually, but it's very enjoyable, and it's on a Friday afternoon. So if you've got that Friday feeling sometimes and you feel like doing something fun, feel free to join us. You will find the link to register in the show notes. Don't dilly-dally, there aren't very many places, because I want to obviously give the people that are there an opportunity to read out their poems if they want to. But basically it's all about a variety of different business topics. So we're going to be talking about man-interrupting, revolting fridges at work, ridiculous silly things, just to get you using your English and speaking up. And poetry is a great way to make you relax, because many of you I know feel comfortable listening to and writing in English, safely tucked behind that keyboard. But when it comes to actually speaking in English, it can feel really intimidating, can't it? So something like poetry can be a really great way just to kind of lift you out of that and give you a little bit more confidence, a little bit of access to that vocabulary. And, let's just have some fun with words. So you might be wondering, what is your call to action this week? Well, that's simple. The best way to practice getting feedback is to give feedback to other people doing something fairly relaxed and easy. So why not join me for the haiku event on the 29th of April, and you can put your feedback skills to the test. We'll be giving each other feedback. That will all be part of the program. Okay then. Be the very best communicator that you can be. Take care now. It's Coco from the Clever Together Communication Podcast. Have a fabulous week.